Hey guys, one of the things I make a lot are hamburgers. I find that it's actually really easy to fit that into my fit living. Um, Most of the time, I'll actually just have a burger patty. I'll cook it up the way I'll show you how I'm going to do it today. Have it with a side salad. Um, that's if I'm eating like low carb. But you could actually fit it into a pretty healthy lifestyle by just, either going with a regular hamburger bun. I mean, you don't want to have something too bready or anything like that. Today, what I'm going to use is actually a gluten-free bun, just because I've been on a little bit of a gluten-free kick. So the first thing to consider when you're looking into how to make a burger is the source of the meat. Um, Now, in a jam, what I'll do is I'll buy those pound packets of grass-fed beef. That's kind of like the last thing I would really prefer. What I really like to do is um, buy a big piece of chuck at the supermarket and just let them grind it up for me. This way, you know it's coming from one source. Because what they do a lot with those packets of meat is they take the scraps from a lot of the offcuts and then they just grind it up and sell and package it and sell it, which isn't necessarily bad. I mean, it's a lot better than those like tubes of meat that have like meat painted on the outside of it, that you get at like Walmart or other low quality supermarkets. Um, so actually, what I did was I went to my local Whole Foods, and I know I like a mix. Ground chuck is good. That gives you like a 75-25 mix of um, protein to fat. Um, I like to blend it. What you'll find is a lot of the steakhouses in New York City, they use what's called Pat LaFrieda beef, and they say that they'll come up with a special blend. And what they usually do is blend either short rib, brisket, and or chuck in different ratios. So actually, the ratio that I prefer is about 2-to-1 brisket to short rib. Um, what I find is that the brisket is a lot leaner. It does have that fat cap on top, but the brisket ends up lending a lot more lean protein, and then the short rib brings in some different kind of flavor, and a little more of the fattiness. And it's about a 70-30 protein to fat for this. So what I'm going to do now is I butchered the short ribs a little bit. If you don't believe me, these are the bones. I'm going to roast them and make a stock or something with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these up. I'm going to grind them in my meat grinder. If you, this is one of those things that if you and your butcher are friends, they'll do it for you. My wife bought me a pretty awesome professional meat grinder, that I want to try to use as much as possible. But just one thing, coming from working in a butcher background, um, a lot of times for us, the machine they'll be working with has such a high capacity that if you ask them for a pound, that they may just lose that in the whole system that they have. So you kind of have to go in there expecting to buy, a few pounds of stuff, um, because you got to make it worth their while, and also just because of their equipment limitations. So I'm gonna grind this up, and then I'll come right back, and we'll talk about how I go about cooking it. So I have my ground meat. Now it's not really blended together. So what you need to do, just because each cut of meat has going to have different levels of fat and protein, so you want to get it kind of homogeneous. Um, the one thing that you got to be careful of in working with it, your hands are warm. Your hands touching fat is going to start to kind of melt the fat, and you kind of want that to stay as solid as possible. So what I would just say is work with your fingertips and just kind of pull it into the middle, and then what you don't want to do is pick it up and squeeze it together. That's kind of defeats the purpose of making your own steak, grinding up your own meat. And you know, what you're looking for is just you want to kind of pick it up, let it fall, and just kind of get it all nice and mixed together. You want it to kind of look like ground meat. Now, when I ground this up, I didn't grind it on the finest setting because I kind of want a little bit of texture to it. The grinder that I have, if I use the finest die, what happens is it kind of gives you this really kind of gritty texture, and I want to be able to taste the meat. And as the burger cooks, I want the fat to render and, you know, kind of baste the burger as I make it. So this is looking pretty good. So now in terms of the burger that I'm making today, the size that I like to actually work with is about 1/3 of a pound. So I'm actually going to use a digital scale to measure exactly what that is, because first of all, I want to make sure I'm eating enough. That's kind of the meal I want to have today. You don't need to measure it. I just like to portion out my food a lot. Plus inventory control. And I'll put the rest of this aside. So I have my 1/3 of a pound burger patty here. And now what I'm going to do with it, I'm going to kind of roll it into a ball neatly. Kind of just till it's kind of smooth. You kind of do want to pack it a little at this point, but nothing too crazy. Again, you don't want you kind of want the pieces of meat to be separate so that as they cook, they kind of season and flavor each other. So once you get it to that like a meatball, what I like to do is I'll put it in my hand, and then with all 4 of my fingers press, and I'll give it a quarter of a turn, and I'll press. And at that point, it starts to come apart a little bit. I'll come back and I'll shape it, and then press. Now this is where you start to consider your method of cooking. I'm going to use a cast iron skillet today, which I'm actually already preheating on medium heat. I prefer cast iron skillet burgers over grilled burgers, at least with the grill that I have, because what I tend to find is that by using a method of cooking that's straight up conduction, which that's the heat is coming from the bottom of the cast iron skillet, so that's called conduction heat. From that kind of burger, you develop a much better crust. Just gonna wash my hands here for a second. So what I find is when I grill my burgers, I don't have a strong enough grill that the direct heat from the bottom cooks it. So when I close that lid, what happens is, because you have convection heat and you also have radiation heat, the burger cooks from all directions, and the juices kind of go all over the place, and it makes it expand. That's why if you watch Food Network, they instruct you to make a dimple in the middle. That's to kind of try to avoid the whole top opening up. So, like I said, I think a cast iron skillet, honestly, I prefer it for my steaks and also for my burgers. And there's a few, that's the main reason. The other reason is you could actually use the skillet to flavor your burger more. You could, in the second half of the cooking, you could add butter, and you could baste with butter. You can add herbs to that butter. So if you're doing like a steak or burger that way, it kind of gives you a little more leeway. You can't really do that on a grill. I mean, I guess you can if you get creative about it. So in terms of how I like to season my burgers, basically just salt and pepper. A lot of times what you'll find is that chefs will include things like ketchup and other seasonings into the mix. I don't like to do that. I kind of want to taste the beef in all of its glory. So the only thing I really add is salt and pepper. Now pepper, I don't put too much when I'm doing it on a cast iron, because it does have a tendency to burn. And then my salt, you want to kind of liberally season it. And I'm going to hit the other side as well. Because you have to realize the seasoning that you're putting on top is going to flavor the entire thing as it cooks and as you bite into it. the other thing I want to mention is that when I made this patty, I made it just a little bigger than the bun because it does have a tendency to shrink, especially when you're dealing with a blend of meat that has so much fat. The short rib adds quite a bit of fat to this. So I'm actually gonna use a little bit of, this is grapeseed oil. You could use olive oil, you could use canola oil. I like grapeseed because it really doesn't add to the flavor at all. And I'm just gonna add a little bit just to get things started on the one side. And you want your pan preheated pretty well. I'm gonna rub that around. You could oil your pan if you want. It's kind of up to you. And then I'm gonna go right into the pan. You want to hear that sizzle. You don't want to put it into a cold pan. You really want the burger to pick up a good sear on each side. That's kind of the best part of having a burger. Let me bring this here so you can see. So I have my burger on my cast iron. It's cooking away. For the first few minutes, you really don't want to touch it much. Just let it do its thing. If you notice, I put it over to one side of the skillet. That's because I want one of the sides to remain nice and hot. Cast iron, the best part about cast iron, you could do this in a stainless steel pan or another non-stick. What I don't like about using Teflon is you're heating it pretty high. So what that usually tends to happen is to degrade the Teflon. So I would say if you're going to do this, go to the store, buy a $20 cast iron skillet. The cast iron skillet is one of the most versatile tools you buy for the kitchen, and it'll last forever if you know how to take care of it right. And it comes with a little instruction guide, and there's plenty of information on the internet about how to actually take care of a good cast iron skillet. So I like the cast iron because it maintains its heat. Stainless steel will work well for a burger, but it might stick. Cast iron is naturally non-stick if you actually take good care of it. So just to check in on the burger, it's kind of sizzling along. You can kind of watch it as it cooks. You could see the amount that it's cooking come up the side. Basically, I like to have my burgers on the medium rare to medium side. So I tend to just let it come up. When you can see it's cooked right around in the center, I'll flip it over to the other side and cook the other side. It takes maybe 4 or 5 minutes per side. Okay, we're about ready to flip. I'll bring the camera over and give her a flip. I use a spatula for this. If you use tongs, you risk breaking it apart. So just get under it and then give her a flip. And you notice it got a nice crust around the outside. That's what's known as the Maillard reaction, which is the interaction of a carbohydrate or a sugar with an amino acid or a protein under very high heat. It's very similar to caramelization, but caramelization is the same process with sugar and sugar. This is what gives you that really kind of golden flavor when you do a burger or a steak or any kind of chicken, anything like that. Around this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually throw my bun in the oven just to get it nice and warm through. And again, I'm using, this is an Udi's gluten-free bun. You could use whatever you want. Potato roll works really well. Right now, this is what fits into my macros, so I'm going with this. I'm not necessarily 100% gluten-free, but I try to avoid it whenever I can for various reasons. So I'm going to throw that in the oven. This is also the time where you would think about adding butter to this. It makes it a little more unhealthy, it makes it a little more decadent, but if you take about a tablespoon of butter and right now just put it on top and let it melt, what will happen is it'll actually soak into the meat as it cooks, flavor the meat, bring some extra richness, some extra fattiness to it, and then what you could do is take a spoon and just baste around the outside of it. For me today, there's quite enough fat on in the actual meat mix itself. And I'm gonna actually, I like a little bit, like a little layer of mayo on my burger, so I'm gonna save the fat for that. So you basically want it to cook around the same amount on each side. Generally, sometimes I like to cook the first side more than the second side. But if you have a cast iron that's big enough, you could actually end up doing it on both sides. And it does get a little smoky, so you might want to make sure that the smoke detector might not have the battery in it. You didn't hear that from me. So I'm just going to check by touching. Right now it's still kind of rare. I'm about ready to pull it off. So just coming back and taking a look. You'll see it's starting to look like it's falling apart a little bit. That's okay. I could have packed it a little tighter. What probably happened is you'll also notice there's quite a bit of fat in the pan. What might have happened is that fat just melted away and kind of leaves the structure kind of falling apart a little. But it's still in one piece. I'm just going to be careful about how I take it off. And I'm actually going to put it to rest, and I'm actually going to flip it over, which is kind of a trick that I like to do, because, excuse me, just want to pull that off the heat. By flipping it over, what you do is make the side that has been exposed to the heat not touch the pan. I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs a little bit, but while it rests, I like to just let it, how do I want to say this? If you take the side that's been on the direct heat and you put it directly on the plate, what's going to happen is you're going to have some condensation as it cools, and it'll actually make it sog up the crust that you just developed on the burger. So I'm going to leave it like that. Basically, the rule of thumb that I have is if it cooked for X amount of minutes, you want to rest it for either half X or up to X amount of minutes. So I won't bite into that for another 5 or 10 minutes because what's happening while you rest it, because there was direct heat onto the proteins, what the proteins do is they actually seize up. And as the water escapes, that structure gets even more tight. What happens as it cools down is that relaxes. The juices kind of, they say the juices redistribute on Food Network, but it's kind of, the juices never really migrate to one area or another. It just allows it so that each individual cell relaxes so that when you bite into it or cut into it, that all the liquid doesn't just run out on you. It's not a myth. I mean, if you take a steak or a burger or anything that has some juices in it, and you cook it and cut right into it, you'll notice that if you do that right away, you'll have all over your cutting board all the juices. If you were just to let that sit for 10, 20 minutes, then you would have a nice juicy steak where those juices are running into your own mouth instead of onto a cutting board. So to dress it up, I just split the bun open. Again, this is a gluten-free bun. You don't have to use a gluten-free bun. You can use whatever you like. Just a little mayonnaise, like a half tablespoon. I'm not trying to take away from the actual burger. The burger is the star here. Even the bun, honestly, is not to me as important as the actual burger. In fact, there are days where I don't even have the bun. I'll just do like a side salad. And then the burger goes directly onto the mayo. Just like that. And I like to use a little ketchup on top. Again, just a taste. Maybe 3/4 of a tablespoon or so. And that's it. That's pretty much my burger. So what you could do is you could do this as sliders. You could do a half-pound burger if you want. You can kind of make it your own. What I'm gonna serve it on the side with, I'm gonna serve on the side with this is a little spring mix I tossed with some balsamic vinegar and olive oil, just to keep it light. And there we have it. So for my spring mix, I buy store-bought spring mix, and then I add some local arugula to it, just because I like the snap that the arugula brings to the whole thing. So I guess now you want me to bite into it. You can see it's still really juicy. Kind of juices are flowing out there. See what the least messy way of doing this is. Now I've been having burgers maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just because you can see it's a 10-20 minute thing to prepare. And for the last week, I've been using the prepackaged just meats because it's a convenience food, and I can taste this as a world of different compared to that. There's so much more flavor, and like I said, by keeping it simple with just some salt and pepper and just a little oil to get it started, you really taste the meat. I could taste kind of the lean brisket and then the kind of fattier parts of the short rib. And everything kind of has a good mouthfeel. This is hands down one of my favorite things to make, is a burger, and it's one of those things that's kind of a food of love thing. If you can control every ingredient in there, and it kind of becomes like, you know, you're putting your heart and soul onto a plate. And again, like the way that I do it isn't the way that you have to do it. Some people, when they do that second flip, they'll toss it in an oven and let it cook, and then that'll kind of shave off a few minutes off the cook time. I mean, there are thousands of ways to cook burgers. You could add cheese. Like I said, you could do a million different things with a burger. But this is kind of straight up the simple technique to doing it, and from there the sky's the limit.